This time on Poll Hub, the Nunes Memo, the historic battle between the FBI, the intelligence community, Democrats, some Republicans, and on the other side, the White House and its allies. A few argue this is not unprecedented in American history, but most people understand we are in uncharted territory, and the fundamental question for many Americans is, who do you trust? We'll look at what the polls have been saying over the last few months and years about trust, and we'll talk with Ben Wittes from the Brookings Institution about what it all means. We're also going to talk about what polls generally do after a State of the Union, and which Super Bowl team do people hate more? No, I'm just kidding. It's the Eagles versus the Patriots in the Marist Poll Bowl, something like that. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. I'm DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Murgoff, Director of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
Congressman Devin Nunes, California Republican, head of a committee in Congress that has been in the news a lot, has a memo. We've all heard a lot about it. Whether it gets released or not, as we record this, it has not been released. There's about 18 different reports about whether it will or not. But it has really been at the center of kind of an unprecedented storm, one that really, I mean, this word gets used too often, but it really gets back to Watergate. It really gets the last time we saw this kind of crisis between the FBI, intelligence community, and a White House was Watergate. Lee, you've talked a lot. But you've talked a lot about this and about we're really in uncharted territory. What do you when you look at this? What do you think?
Well, I think we're not quite there yet. I mean, we're in uncharted territory for sure, but I don't think we quite have gotten to the constitutional crisis. But I think what people are thinking about is it just around the corner, and what happens if A happens and then B happens, and where are we going to be at that point? And so I think there is a sense of a Saturday night massacre that's slowly evolving this time, as opposed to in Watergate when it was sort of a dramatic moment. We're having ongoing daily battles as the story gradually unfolds.
And some people argue that this really is about Robert Mueller and his investigation, not about the things that the Nunes Memo talks about. Whether that is the case or not, the Mueller memo is clearly at the center of the president's thinking. What do we know about what Americans think about this investigation that's now been going on for almost a year?
Well, I think what we found in our latest NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll, when we asked Americans about what they think of the investigation, and specifically about Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, surprisingly, most Americans don't really know a lot about him or the investigation itself. And I on the one hand, yes, I think that is very surprising because it has, there has been so much news and discussion, but there's also been a lot of noise. And I think that this give and take about whether this memo gets released or not. I mean, every single day we seem to have some kind of give and take, and we are losing the sense of what the more important issue is here, which is, what really here is at stake.
Yeah, and I think, on this point, which I think is sort of where I bite off and maybe where you were, asking me about is, if you have someone like Mueller and people are unsure how to rate him because they just, it's tough to follow this bouncing ball every day. What does that mean in terms of efforts that the White House might want to initiate to delegitimize him, to kind of like undercut this investigation? In a sense, if this was a political candidate and he had a 42% unsure, don't know rating, he'd be really vulnerable to being defined by his opposing candidate. So I think one of the things that we should be watching for in future polls is the issue of what's happening to him as he becomes a little more controversial, perhaps, and there's discussions about whether he should be fired and the like. If that intensifies, what's the poll down?
So that's really interesting. The poll showed 29% favorable view of Mueller, 29% unfavorable, and you referenced 42% unsure, never heard. And as you said, a political candidate in that position would be ripe for being defined by your opponent. In this case, whether Mueller sees it or not, or whether Trump sees it or not, I think the public might largely see Trump as the opponent here. The other thing that I thought was interesting in this is that 68% of the people said Mueller should be allowed to finish his investigation. And if you think about why people don't have an opinion about Mueller is Mueller hasn't been on camera talking
Sure.
this entire time. This is all happening, and how this plays out, I
and
think
that's what prosecutors aren't able to do, make their case.
They can't get on TV and talk. We talked with Benjamin Wittes, who is at the Brookings Institution, also the Lawfare blog, about this. He is an expert on this, has written about it, and he has a really interesting take on what this does, not to necessarily the public's trust in our institutions, but about the oversight that Congress has over the intelligence community, something that came out of Watergate. There was no oversight before that, and he thinks that's at risk because of this. Take a listen to this. So in light of the Nunes Memo coming out, there, and potentially, we don't know yet whether it's going to be actually publicized or not, what's the risk to the general public? Because I think it's an abstract thing, and we hear a lot from security experts that it puts people's lives in danger in the IC, things like that. But if you're just somebody at home and you go, well, Trump says or the Republicans say we should see this, why shouldn't we see this? What's the risk?
Okay, so I want to identify three separate risks. So one is the contents of FISA applications are simply never disclosed. And that is one of the most sensitive bodies of information that the government has. The FISA process is both for national security reasons, but also for civil liberties reasons. You know, these are situations where the government goes into court and asks for surveillance orders against people who may not have done anything wrong. There may be probable cause to believe they're an agent of a foreign power, but the probable cause is not certainty, right? And by the way, being an agent of a foreign power isn't necessarily illegal. And so, somebody may be, you don't want people to be slimed. In addition, the way the government collects information is extremely sensitive, both with respect to who they're talking to, who they're getting it from, what they call sources, and also the technical means by which they do it, which is sometimes called methods. So when you start disclosing the contents of FISA applications, you really are talking about the most sensitive stuff the FBI has in terms of its day-to-day way of doing business. In the course of the 40 years now, 35 years that there has been a FISA, the number of times the House Intelligence Committee has released the contents of a FISA application or somebody's comments on that is zero. And so it's an extraordinary act. Second danger is the danger of doing it again, right? So once you set this precedent that if the House Intelligence Chairman is irritated enough at the FBI and wants to defend the president enough against the Mueller investigation, he can release misleading information that nobody can respond to because the information is classified, right? That is a situation that is incredibly ripe for misuse.
And this time it's Republicans, but next time it could be a Democrat trying to protect a Democratic president. I mean, I would think that would be the bigger danger to the country.
Correct, but both are, it's the same, it's a neutral principle, right? But there's a defensive side of it, trying to protect the president. There's also an offensive side of it. How are you trying to protect the president? You're trying to protect the president by sliming career public servants and potentially intelligence sources, right? So what does that do to the willingness of somebody like Chris Steele, if we assume that we're talking about Chris Steele here? What does it do to the willingness of somebody like Chris Steele to come forward and talk to the FBI in the future? By the way, if you're not concerned about Chris Steele because you think he's, a British Democratic partisan, ask yourself about an Al-Qaeda source or a mob source, right? Most FBI informants are not political operatives. And then there's a third set of dangers that I think is, to me, in some ways, the most alarming, which is the danger to the intelligence oversight system itself. The intelligence oversight system, which dates from the post-Watergate era, said we need Congress to be able to oversee the activities of the intelligence community.
And this came about because of the Church Commission, and there were abuses that the CIA had committed that were uncovered by Congress.
And the FBI and NSA. So these, this was a really important part of the post-Watergate, post-civil rights era reforms of the intelligence community. And there are many aspects of those reforms, but one of them is that you create these intelligence committees, one in the House and one in the Senate, that have serious people on them and cleared staff and cleared membership, and they receive all the information they want. And they oversee and they make sure that the intelligence community is behaving in a responsible fashion. And the part of that deal is that oversight process is secure. They don't leak. They don't tell lies about the intelligence community. They raise their concerns if they can't do them in public without talking about classified information in private, right? And this system has served the country extremely well. And I fear that it will not recover from this episode, because in this episode, what happened was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, with the connivance, apparently, of the President of the United States, is stabbing the FBI in the back and stabbing, by the way, the FISA process in the back. And so the question is, if you're the FBI, does this impair your willingness to share information with these committees? And by the way, if you're another intelligence committee, does it impair your willingness, your eagerness, your desire to be forthcoming with these committees? And the answer to that question is, duh.
Interesting about that to me is that the claims by some in conservative circles of the deep state. If there's a deep state, it drives the deep state deeper.
Oh, I mean, look, the whole intelligence oversight system is built on trust. And it is built on the fact that you can have robust, sometimes confrontational, sometimes really testy oversight, and it doesn't become public because these are things we cannot talk about in public. And when the chairman of the Intelligence Committee decides, okay, let's make it all public, and that is going to change the calculation of the community in respecting the oversight role and in engaging the oversight process in a sustained way. It will never be the same as long as Devin Nunes is in that seat, and it's going to take loving, careful, long-term rehabilitation of that relationship by whoever succeeds him of whichever party in order to repair it, and it might not be reparable.
You on the Lawfare blog, and then we here at Marist have been doing polling around the notion of how the public has faith or lacks faith in democratic institutions. And in most polls, the courts seem to be the last man standing to some degree, as many other institutions fail to maintain their trust with the public. How important do you think it is that the FBI maintain the faith of the public or the intelligence community, or are they like any other institution, like government, or business, or even religion, in that it ebbs and flows and life goes on even if people lose a little bit of faith? Why are they different?
Well, they're different for a really important reason, which is that they exercise the coercive powers of the federal government up to and including killing people, right? I mean, the FBI's job, of course, is not like the military, isn't to kill people, but they do sometimes do it, right? And they make criminal cases against people that lead to long-term imprisonments or sometimes the death penalty. They carry guns, right? And and they spy on people, right? So these are like, when you think of government doing ugly things to you, it's very likely to be somebody from one of these intelligence agencies. And so the notion that we need to have confidence that they are operating within a framework of the rule of law and doing the things that we authorize them to do and not doing the things we forbid them to do is a important component of the idea of living in a democratic society under the rule of law. Now, I do not believe that super secret spy agencies are ever going to have public trust. And I actually gave a speech at NSA once in which I don't remember the exact words, but I said, look, you guys are a covert spy agency, right? You're not going to get public trust is too much, right, to ask. What you want, what you need is the adequate public confidence so that your ability to do your job is not impaired. And the FBI having, it shouldn't be politically popular. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be that we don't question the FBI. We should ask questions. But when you write a memo about a whole lot of classified information that is factually incomplete to the point of being inaccurate, which is what the FBI alleges about this memo. And when you, and then you turn around and release that memo in a fashion that the Justice Department, Trump's own Justice Department, describes as an extraordinarily reckless act, you are taking a hammer to an institution here, and we're going to suffer a lot of damage from that.
All right, thanks for talking with us, Benjamin Wittes from Lawfare blog and also from Brookings Institute, with some real insight into what the Nunes Memo and everything that comes from that, how that could affect our democracy. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wow, that was really interesting. Changing gears here, this was also the week that President Trump gave his State of the Union address, and there were lots and lots of polls that were bouncing around one way and another, but overall seemed to also show that the president did a really good job. You have some thoughts about that, Lee?
Well, first of all, post State of the Union message polls tend to be very short-lived in terms of their bounce. We've seen that in the past, and there's probably no reason to think that that's not going to occur now. People might like it. They don't necessarily then think the president's approval rating goes up or not, and it certainly hasn't had an impact. I'm thinking back to Barack Obama in 2010 when people really liked his State of the Union message, and then several months later, they lost 63 seats in the House. So it doesn't necessarily convert to that. But I think one of the things we need to do with this topic here is discuss some methodological concerns we have about these instant polls that come right after the State of the Union
Well, sure.
message.
I mean, a couple of the media organizations, CBS News did a poll. They found that 75% of voters, now these are voters who are watching the speech, approved of the speech, and 81% thought that Trump was trying to unite rather than divide the country. And when we think about those kinds of numbers, it seems like it doesn't quite match up with what we have seen with other national polls. CNN similarly showed that 48% of speech watchers have a very positive impression of Trump's speech. And again, he got very positive ratings, which matched President Obama's first State of the Union speech in 2010.
But the CBS poll had some issues that you raise about who was polled, right?
Yeah.
Well,
so first of all, it's watchers. And who's watching? The people watching tend to be the people who like the party of the incumbent. So in this case, the sample was very much Republican. It's not a national sample that looks like the country. It's the sample of those who are watching the State of the Union. When Barack Obama was president, it was a more Democratic-looking sample.
Yeah, this was 42% of the sample was Republican, 25% Democrat, 32 independent.
Yeah,
that's so out of whack.
But that makes sense. It makes sense.
Right.
The other issue I have with these polls is, I always think when you do a poll that's starting like maybe 10 or 10:30 at night, how are they getting the East Coast here? I mean, I know they've pre-selected.
Well, they
people.
do. They, I think, in many of the polls, and not necessarily on these specifically, but usually, if we're going to do a poll of an event that's going to occur later in the evening than we would normally call people, then we do pre-select individuals to ask them if, in fact, they will be watching, and then to find out their reaction afterwards, so that we are, thinking about. But we're just not interviewing, and waking people up at odd hours.
But the point being, I think the point that really takes, and when I was a political reporter and doing State of the Union coverage, one of the pieces of coverage I actually liked to do was to go sit with a family or in a place where there were people of different opinions and watch it with them and then talk to them afterwards. It wasn't scientific. It wasn't a sample that way.
No, but those are very interesting. I mean, those
right.
qualitative focus groups, and many media organizations have done them.
Right. So that was always interesting to me. But what you said at the beginning of this, Lee, holds true and has held true for decades, which is it's great the morning after, but talk to me a week later, and pretty much everybody's forgotten.
And we're moving on already. I mean, it's not that long ago that the State of the Union was the moment, and now that moment has passed already as we get back into all kinds of controversies. And Donald Trump, interestingly, didn't go around the country selling anything that he said at the State of the Union, which presidents typically do. But I think the bottom line in all this is when we're thinking about the surveys, we're thinking about who was watching and is that representative. And not to cite a great political analyst, but Stephen Colbert even said in referring to these instant polls, it depends on who's watching. So even he has this.
Welcome to The Late Show. I'm your host, Stephen Colbert. Everyone's still keenly aware that Donald Trump gave a speech last night. I believe it ended 15 minutes ago. And good news for Trump. According to CNN, 70% of people who watched the speech had either a very positive or somewhat positive reaction, which seems good until you learn that it is the lowest net positive rating for a State of the Union address since CNN first asked the question. Of course, true. That's true. Of course, it's an odd sample size. That's just a poll of people who actually watch the State of the Union. So late night talk show hosts and the criminally insane.
So I'll admit I'm not a huge football fan, but I do know that the Patriots and the Eagles are among the most disliked teams in the NFL. Not in Philadelphia and New England, but kind of like the Cowboys back in the day, America's team, but also America's hated team. So we went out to find out, who do you root for, especially if you don't live in Philly or if you're not in Patriots Nation. And what did we find?
We find like the Yankees, it's like.
Yeah, I'm sitting here with Giants fans. I should have said that first off. Yeah. I'm sitting here with Giants fans.
Yeah, and this is really, really tough. Although at least we do have the Giants have a Super Bowl ring, having beaten the Patriots
twice.
So, there's some glee.
Okay, so
there.
what does America think,
we
guys?
almost beat the Eagles. Hold on a second. We almost beat the Eagles twice this year. Unfortunately, lost both times.
The Eagles, being in our division, it's really tough. I mean, we are really struggling here with whom to root for, but Americans aren't having that tough a time.
Jay wants us to get to the take on this. I think.
So Americans, not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, are rooting for the Eagles. I think they'd actually like to see a real contest here. However,
39% to 26%. That's actually a real number. I mean, it's not like a little bit. That's interesting.
But 60% of Americans think the Patriots are going to win.
90% of the bookmakers in Vegas think that. So.
But that's including Eagle fans.
Absolutely.
So if you're an Eagle fan, you probably still think that the Patriots are likely to win. Although last year's Super Bowl does come down right to the wire, and who knows, over time.
We also took a look at a serious issue that that we've been talking about regarding the NFL this year, and this is the protests that players have been having, on the field. And so we did ask also. Is there a place for that in the Super Bowl? Should players be required to stand, or should they be allowed to kneel? And Americans divide. 48% believe that the players should be allowed to kneel if they choose to, but 47% believe they should be required to stand.
I think that's really interesting. After this entire year of this has been, the president has pushed this, other people have pushed this, not just the president. I mean, this has been a major kind of cultural touchstone issue, a hot button issue. And it's interesting to me that after all of this, all year long, all of the shouting, all the screaming, we're almost perfectly evenly divided about this.
And not maybe surprising, given that the country is divided on almost every other issue. Why not on this? But I think before we wrap up, I mean, Jay, you're as a expert in football, I know. And where's this game? What's the score? What's the final score here? I mean, this is let's get the
35-24.
Oh my God!
Patriots.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I just showed
What did you
Mary,
write down?
our executive producer, 35-24 Patriots. I've been studying football my entire life, and you think it's a round baseball that, I don't know.
27-24 Eagles.
Ooh. There'll be some Philadelphia Eagle Crow maybe being served up next week. I don't know. But anyway, we'll find out.
Well, may the better team win.
Yes.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub, the football edition. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll here at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Rough week, but Mary managed to pull us all through.
Okay, and we also take time to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. Provides us the ability to look back in time at survey questions and the results over decades when we want to look at long-term trends and differences. They're the ones. I also serve on the board of Roper in interest of full disclosure.
And please send your questions to pollhub@marist.edu. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to be doing lots and lots of polling in the weeks to come. And if you have an idea about something you'd like to ask, whether it's about politics or it's just about anything on your mind and you want to know what other Americans think, we'd love to ask it. You can also check out Poll Hub on social media. We are pretty much everywhere at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. And please, don't forget to subscribe.